All right. Hello, my name is Anna Barker, and this is the final Zoom presentation on Hungarian literature. Over the past 3, 4 months, we have been having way too much fun with revolutions, and I have my thick tome on the Revolution of 1848 right here, right next to me. We have been talking about the impact of the Revolution of 1848 on the creative output of the Hungarian novelist Jókai Mór, whose bicentennial we celebrated with cooking his favorite bean soup in February this year. So it was amazing to see so many people take a chance on an author who's not just virtually unknown, but unknown today in the West. And I'm just so happy that so many people undertook this journey. We read two of his novels, Baron's Sons, or in Hungarian, the title is Kösi ember fiai. And then so from the 19th century and the Revolution of 1848, in which Jókai Mór participated as a young man. We went to the 17th century in Transylvania, was the Golden Age in Transylvania, and that is his novel, Erdély Aranykora. So as a result of all of this frantic Hungarian activity, I was invited to give talks on Jókai Mór because this year was declared the year of Jókai Mór in Hungary. And so a lot of activity was dedicated to celebrating him because he's considered Hungary's Tolstoy, Hungary's Chaucer, not Chaucer, Charles Dickens, and Hungary's Balzac. And I'm definitely dragged back into the 17th century and even earlier times. So Hungary's Tolstoy, Hungary's Charles Dickens, and Hungary's Balzac. And it's fascinating, he was Queen Victoria's favorite non-English author. So she had a great affinity for Hungarian culture since she ordered Hungarian porcelain, she read Hungarian novels, but she did not like Hungarian revolutionaries. So in the course of my PowerPoint, I'm going to address that. So yes, I was invited to give this talk at the Franz Liszt Institute in New York City and the Kossuth Foundation in DC. And then I gave a version of this talk at the Minneapolis Museum of Russian Art, all in the span of the last 3 weeks. So I'm still breathless. I've been living out of the suitcase, and I am thrilled to be able to share this presentation with you. It's a version of the presentation I gave on Zoom about Hungarian literature, Hungarian culture, and history in January or February at the start of this tutorial. So yes, so this presentation was something that I worked on in the process of teaching Jókai Mór and covering his novels, commenting on his novels chapter by chapter between February and May of this year. The Revolution of 1848 follows in the footsteps of so many revolutions that happened in Europe. First, of course, the Revolution of 1789, the Great French Revolution, celebrated to this day in France on Bastille Day on July 14th annually. And then, of course, the Revolution of 1830. And the image that you saw on the screen, the Delacroix painting of Liberty Leading the People, is, of course, dedicated to the Revolution of 1830. And then the Revolution of 1848 followed. And it was the culmination of so many issues that remained unresolved at the end of the Napoleonic Wars and in the course of this momentary upheaval that happened in Europe in 1830. So without much further ado, Jókai Mór's bicentennial in the context of the Revolution of 1848 and the inception of Hungary's national revival. And I love to show images of Hungarian acacia or akác fall. This was my dad's favorite walk in the cemetery where he is buried today. He used to go there 3 times a day. He took me on these walks, and I love to tell people that, you know, when we're young and we are told by our parents all kinds of stories, we sort of listen, but when they're no longer with us, we realized that they really knew what they were doing because my dad trained me very, very well. And so this is literally the place where the idea got its inception to teach Hungarian literature and do a tutorial dedicated to Jókai Mór. Because of course, Jókai Mór is my dad's neighbor in the Kerepesi Cemetery. And every time I have to I visit my dad, I have to drive around Yokai's tomb. And then every time I'm coming back from my dad's gravesite, I have to drive around Yokai's tomb. So eventually I stopped and I said hello to Jókai Mór. And when I saw the date of his birth and the fact that he was going to be 200 in 2025, and those of you who have been reading with me for a long time, you know my affinity for um, centennials, bicentennials, important dates. We even celebrate things like 180th anniversary of the publication of the Three Musketeers, or 400th anniversary of Cardinal Richelieu becoming First Minister of France. So I thought, well, this is a no-brainer. We are going to do the bicentennial of Jókai Mór. And of course, the Karapeshi Cemetery is the place where my dad took me countless times, and he took me to the graves of everyone who is important in Hungarian history, culture, literature, politics. So the cemetery actually started as a burial ground for Hungarian revolutionaries in 1849 because so many young men were killed and they needed to bury hundreds, thousands of corpses when the revolution failed. But eventually, everyone who counts in Hungarian literature, history, culture, music, politics of the 19th and 20th and 21st centuries has been buried in the Karapeshi Cemetery. So this is the monument to the Hungarian painter Munkácsy, and I'm going to show a few paintings to you later on. This is the incredible mausoleum of Hungary's first president during the Revolution of 1848. This is, of course, the beautiful Jókai Körönt, the Jókai Circle, and the grave of Jókai Mór is situated inside the structure. And so my route to dad goes along the Jókai Körönt on the way and behind the Jókai Körönt on the way back from my dad's grave. And this is the largest, the most impressive, the most incredible monument in all of Hungary, and it is the mausoleum of Kossuth Lajos. And in Hungarian, in English, it's pronounced Kossuth. And I was always so amused that I came from the world where I'm going to pronounce it the Hungarian way. Kossuth Lajos has the largest monument in all of Hungary. He's considered to be the most important Hungarian, and he was the hero of the Revolution of 1848, a close personal friend of Jókai Mór. And the connection is remarkable because when Lajos Kossuth died, Jókai Mór was still alive, and Jókai Mór delivered the funeral oration at his funeral, which is like goosebumps, everyone. The connections are just incredible. So I ended up, I'm a kid who was born on the banks of the Tisza River in a small town, and Tisza is just absolutely magical. Those of you who were reading Lord Byron with me a few years ago, you know this photo because I posted it because I was reading Lord Byron and posting about Lord Byron to commemorate the 200th anniversary of his death right in a town on the banks of the Tisza River. And I was born in the foothills of the Carpathian Mountains. So the Golden Age in Transylvania was a very personal story for me. And thank you so much for coming on this journey with me. But then I ended up in this strange place called Iowa, from which I am broadcasting today. And remarkably, I thought I was always amused that the largest county in Iowa, and you can see it right at the top on the border with Minnesota, was the county seat in Algona, was named after a Hungarian revolutionary. So it's pronounced in English the Kossuth County, but it's named after Kossuth Lajos, you know, the man who has this incredible mausoleum in Budapest. So I went from the land of Kossuth having the largest mausoleum to the land where Kossuth gets the largest county. And at some point, I knew that all of these connections will have to click into place, and this was the year. So I got my PhD at the University of Iowa in a long time ago in 2002, and I mostly teach these guys. So I teach a class called Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. So many of you have followed me on my journeys through War and Peace, Anna Karenina, Crime and Punishment, Brothers Karamazov, and we have lots more Dostoevsky ahead because in the next 4 years, I'm going to comment on all of his great novels. Those of you who were with me for 100 Days of War and Peace and 100 Days of Brothers Karamazov, you know that during COVID, I took all of my knowledge and passion for these books to the internet. I didn't know how the internet worked until COVID hit, and I realized that I must reach readers because these books must be read. And from my commentary, you know why I find these books pertinent for today's day and age. So eventually we branched out to French books. We did 100 Days of Alexandre Dumas, The Count of Monte Cristo. We did 100 Days of Les Miserables, and the connections between Les Miserables and Tolstoy and Miserable and Jókai Mór are phenomenal. It is the most revolutionary of novels, and it inspired both War and Peace. Tolstoy literally starts writing War and Peace as soon as he reads Les Miserables when it's published in 1862. And Jókai Mór could not have written his wonderful novel, Baron's Sons or Stone-Hearted Men's Sons, without the precursor of Les Miserables. So this is my dad's grave. You can see chestnuts there under the flowers. I always brought chestnuts in my pockets home from school, and the house was full of chestnuts in the fall. And so every time I visit him in the fall, I put a few chestnuts by his little crypt. This is my dad and me. Look at my gigantic head. Can you imagine? He was a very strong-willed man, and I'm a very strong-willed woman. And so the two of us clashed and loved clashing. And he introduced me to history, literature. Every night when I was a teenager and I was brooding, we would go for a long walk and we would have conversations about esoteric matters. So he trained me exceedingly well. And here we are when I was a teenager in the course of one of our walks. And so he taught me a great deal about Hungarian history, Hungarian coat of arms, Hungarian crown. He took me to the Parliament building. He told me about the crown, and the crown has a very fascinating Kossuth Lajos connection. He took me to the place where the crown of Hungary is guarded at the Parliament building. If you ever go to Budapest, please go to see the Parliament building. It is incredible. It's the largest structure in all of Hungary, and it's the people's house, so very appropriate, but very hard to get tickets, especially in the summer. So book your tickets way ahead of time to tour the Parliament building. It is one of the top 10 most toured historical structures in Europe, which is absolutely amazing and makes me very pleased. He told me about St. Stephen and Hungary's conversion to Western Christianity or Roman Christianity. And here's a statue of St. Stephen next to the Mátyás Church and the Fisherman's Bastion on the Buddha Hill. And here's the reconstruction of the Hungarian crown on the Margaret Bridge facing the Parliament building, and of course the importance of the Danube. So those of you who were reading Baron's Sons with me, you understand the importance of the Danube. Do you remember when the Baroness was going back and forth with smugglers between what was then Pozsony, today Bratislava, and Vienna, trying to save all of her sons during the revolutionary movement? And so it's amazing because she's given a passage by the counter-revolutionary, by the royalist, and she says, I don't need a passage. I have a way in and out of Vienna, and that way is, of course, on the Danube River. And then the chain bridge. Do you remember, those of you who were reading with me, in, once again, Baron's Sons, the heroic effort of the Hungarian revolutionaries to save the newly constructed chain bridge from being blown up by the Austrians, because the Austrians were lodged in the Buda Castle, and the Hungarians and the Austrians basically destroyed each other, shooting across the Danube, and the heroic effort to save this masterpiece. This is the first bridge that united Buda and Pest. There was no united city until this bridge was constructed. The Danube is so deep and so wide in this area that technology had to catch up. And so there was always a pontoon bridge across the river, but this is the first permanent bridge across the river, and it was just beautifully restored recently. So once again, Jókai Mór dedicates an entire chapter to the heroic effort on the part of the Hungarians to save it from being blown up by the Austrians in May of 1849. And there's another view of the Danube, the chain bridge, the Parliament building. Of course, there was no Parliament building yet at the time when the Revolution of 1848 happens. It was constructed later on. And so we go back to Kossuth Lajos, who was the greatest impetus for this revolution. I wrote an article about him when I started writing about Iowa's 99 counties, and that was my first article. And that's how they found out about my great effort to promote Hungarian literature in New York City and in Washington, D.C. And that's on the basis of this article. I got those invitations. And then, of course, all of us spent 100 days with Hungarian literature. So thank you so much. It's a tremendous journey. So yes, once again, this is the place where the idea to do this tutorial originated, a beautiful blooming acacia alley in the Kerepesi Cemetery in Budapest, where all of the Hungarian revolutionaries are buried. And I'll show you more of their tombs in the course of this Zoom. Do you see how white the road is? Those are acacia blossoms. Can you imagine how tremendous the aroma is? It's like nothing you can imagine. It's sweet, sweet air, and it's not the kind of smell that makes you allergic. There's no pollen involved, at least it doesn't bother me. But acacia honey is made by bees who are very, very busy pollinating these beautiful blooms, and it is just tremendous. Like, and there's a song in Hungarian called Akácos út, which makes Hungarians weep because it's about connecting with your most profound, deepest memories, and it is all connected with this gorgeous aroma of acacia alleys. So a little bit about Hungary. We'll go through it very fast. And Jókai Mór, it's fascinating in his book. Oh my goodness, I don't want all of these books to topple. But his book called The Golden Age in Transylvania, this one. Chapter 15 of this book is remarkable because it gives you the history of Hungary through 2,000 years. So I'm going to connect every image I'm showing to you to the history of Hungary as it is described by Jókai Mór in this book, The Golden Age in Transylvania. A Central European country, and if you want to know more about Central Europe, I can't recommend this book enough. The Middle Kingdoms, it's quite a tome, but it basically gives you the history of everything between Eastern France and Western Russia in the past 2,500 years. And it's truly remarkable, Middle Kingdoms. So Budapest could not become Budapest. It was Buda and Pest. So that's why when we are reading Baron Sons, there's Pest, the flat part of the city, and Buda Castle. And the two could not be united till later in the 19th century because there was no bridge that could allow effortless communication between the two sides of the city. But today it's the largest city in Hungary. It has about 1.5 million people, and all of Hungary has about 10 million people. But there are so many Hungarians living in the Hungarian diaspora, and you can see how many Hungarians live in the United States, and especially in Romania, which now incorporates that area called Transylvania, which Jókai Mór describes in The Golden Age in Transylvania. So Hungary used to be so large at one point, it like Croatia was a part of the Hungarian kingdom. Pretty soon I'm going to talk about Zrínyi Miklós, who fought Suleiman the Magnificent at the Battle of Szigetvár. He was a Croatian Hungarian lord. And so you know that Croatia borders the Adriatic Sea, so Hungary had access to the sea at one point at its largest extent. And this just shows a map of how many Hungarians live right outside the territory of Hungary, based on the map that was created in 1920 during the Trianon Treaty in Paris, when Hungary was cut down to size. So Hungary lost 2/3 of its territory in 1920. So that's why this enigmatic land in the middle of Europe that speaks this non-Indo-European language has so many Hungarians who live right outside of the borders of Hungary. And it's very important to understand this when you read the novels of Jókai Mór talk about Hungarian culture, because Jókai Mór's birthplace is in Komárno, Slovakia, which, of course, when he was born there, was a part of Hungary. Munkácsy Mihály, the greatest Hungarian painter, whose paintings I'm going to show to you soon, he was born in Munkács, which is now in Ukraine. And then, of course, Transylvania, where all of these amazing events take place in the Golden Age in Transylvania, is in Romania today. So this is the concentration of Hungarians outside of Hungary today. So you can see that the Hungarian diaspora right outside the borders of Hungary in places like Slovakia, Romania, Ukraine, and this is of course a pre-division of Czech and Slovak republics and Yugoslavia breaking up into a number of countries. But there are a lot of Hungarians living in Slovakia, Ukraine, Romania, and Serbia to this day. So here's another map, and this shows a map of Transylvania. And so it's fascinating that Jókai Mór goes back to the 17th century in Transylvania when it was this incredibly important buffer zone between the Ottoman Turkish Empire, who wanted to keep it neutral between themselves, and the enormous Habsburg Empire. And those of you who are keeping up with my posts on Alexander Dumas 20 years after, I posted an entire long historical commentary on why the Habsburgs were so important and so powerful. And so Turkey, the Turkish Ottoman Empire in the 17th century, wanted Transylvania to be neutral. And the Austrian Habsburgs, of course, wanted Transylvania to become a part of this Austrian expansion to the east. And this is the monument that was constructed in Budapest a few years ago in 2020 to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Treaty of Trianon. Very controversial monument, obviously, because governments and people in countries like Slovakia, Romania, and Serbia do not want to discuss with Hungary the fact that some of these cities that are in Romania, Ukraine, Slovakia, Serbia, used to be a part of a larger territory of Hungary. I mean, this is the reason why World War I began where it began, this complete impossibility to keep the Austrian Empire as this multi-ethnic, multinational, multi-confessional country content, and the national divisions that started happening in 1848 and were not resolved in 1848. And that's why Jókai Mór's novel is so important, will eventually bring Europe to the brink of complete collapse because Austrian Empire will start falling apart. But for a kid like me, who was born in the Hungarian diaspora and someone who traveled 6-7 hours into southern Romania, where Jókai Mór's novel takes place, and you saw all of my images from those places, this makes it completely understandable why there are so many Hungarians living outside the borders of Hungary. So the wall has the names of every town that was a part of larger Hungary before 1920. And you can see the Parliament building right in front of it. It is very reminiscent of the Vietnam War Memorial, just this sort of open wound and the pain that just never goes away. And I actually saw the Vietnam War Memorial when I was in DC. So the feel that these two memorials give is very similar. So this brings us to Jókai Mór, who was celebrated by us for the past few months. And his novel, Akusiu Ember Fiai. I love the cover of this audio recording, and those of you who read the novel know what moment in the novel this is representing. And I love the fact that the blood is pouring onto the coat of arms of the Austrian Empire, the two-headed eagle. And then the eagle of Transylvania and the Golden Age in Transylvania. And it's fascinating, his name is known as, so in Hungary, first name comes last. So you have to tell the last name of the person first. So that's why in Hungarian he's Jókai Mór. But to Europeanize his name or make it sound more French, when English editions of this book were published in the 19th century, he was turned into Marius Jókai. And so he almost becomes a hero of the Miserable because we have our very own Marius in that book. And, you know, just Jókai Mór in this book, The Golden Age in Transylvania, goes all the way to the Roman Empire. So must we. When I teach Intro to Russian Culture at the University of Iowa, I always bring a map of the Roman Empire with me, print it out, and I fold it in half, tear it in half, and tell them this is the division of the Roman Empire into Eastern Roman Empire and Western Roman Empire, and we are still dealing with the consequences today. So the Roman Empire started collapsing because of the infusion of this incredible large movement of peoples from Asia into Europe. And the first large movement of people from Asia into Europe was the Huns. And so it's fascinating that Jókai Mór describes this age of, in chapter 15 of the Golden Age in Transylvania, as this transformative movement of waves and waves and waves of newcomers into this territory that changed this territory each time and yet contributed to its development. So the Huns were an absolute terror. And so everyone was panicking when they started burning Roman cities like Cologne and Trier and Reims and Strasbourg and Worms, Mainz. And Paris got a patron saint out of this time period because Saint Genevieve, and this is her monument at one of the bridges across the river in Paris, she led the people of Paris in a prayer to help them save Paris from the invasion of the Huns. And it worked because Attila never entered Paris. And so there are incredible images of Attila the Hun in the Pantheon in Paris. And here he is. One of the murals in the main hall in the Pantheon is dedicated to Attila. And this panel is dedicated to Saint Genevieve, asking the people of Paris to pray so that Attila doesn't enter the city. So he made an impact on the city of Paris. He also made an impact on the city of Rome, because now we have another Pope Leo, right? An American Pope. But the Pope that was the first Leo, Leo the First, or Leo the Great, met Attila at the gates of Rome and asked him to pretty please, according to legend, not to invade Rome, and he didn't. And you can see him almost falling off his horse when Peter and Paul appear with swords protecting the city of Rome. So Attila, the progenitor of what the Hungarians are today, and the name Hungary in English versions of the name of the country comes from this time period. He was painted by Raphael himself. So this is a painting by Raphael in the Vatican in Rome. Also, the Nibelungenlied, the great Germanic epic, has a character named on based on Attila. His name is Atzel. So he ended up in the Germanic heroic epics as well. And he ended up in Dante's Inferno, where Dante puts him in the seventh circle of hell, with all of the other horrible people who are burning in rivers of blood. So he is there. And this division of the Roman Empire and eventual collapse of the Roman Empire was precipitated by the introduction of these peoples, the Huns, who came across the Carpathian Mountains, a term familiar to us after the Golden Age in Transylvania, who then dislodged the Goths, the Visigoths, the Germanic tribes that ended up moving westwards and crossing into Roman territory across the Danube and the Rhine. And so it's fascinating that Jókai Mór in the Golden Age of Transylvania tells us about the age of Trajan. And this is the Pillar of Trajan in Rome, of course, the time period when Rome extended into Transylvania. And he tells about these Transylvanian villages where people are just sort of stumbling through the ruins of the Roman Empire, and they have artifacts from the time period of Emperor Trajan just sort of scattered all over them. And then Jókai Mór tells us that all of these newcomers and new waves of peoples who moved into this area changed it, and yet the names disappeared, the cities would disappear, and the names would come back, and the cities would reappear. And one more fun fact about Hungary, it was, of course, Budapest was evolved out of a Roman city called Aquincum, the city of waters. And the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who came after Trajan, he wrote part of his meditations in this town called Aquincum, which is today in a suburb of Budapest called Óbuda. Fun fact, those of you who are gladiator fans, the first battle in Gladiator 1 occurs between Marcus Aurelius and the Germanic tribes, and the location of that battle is right on the border between Austria and Hungary, probably in the same area where Richard is escaping pursuit from the Austrians. Do you remember that daredevil, absolutely stunning chapter in Baron's Sons, where Richard is leading his Hungarian hussars out of Austria through the mountains? They climb cliffs. That is the almost the same geographic location when Marcus Aurelius appears fighting the Germanic tribes at the start of Gladiator. So fun fact. All right. And then come more people from Asia. And these are, of course, Magyars. So it's very important to note that Hungary's name in Hungarian is not Hungary, but Magyarország. So they trace themselves to this particular group of Asian transplants into Europe who are called the Magyars, spelled with a GY. So GY in Hungarian makes a soft D sound, J. And this is, of course, Arpad was the 7 chieftains who crossed the Carpathian Mountains in the very same spot, Verescay Pass, where the Huns crossed the Carpathian Mountains, entered Europe, and this set of Asian transplants into Europe stayed. So Hungarians connect their ancestry to this particular migration of peoples from Asia into Europe and call themselves Magyarország, the land of the Magyars. You can see that the Pannonia region, what the Romans call the Pannonia region, is kind of a very convenient geographical space. So the half moon shaped or horseshoe shaped formation, that's the Carpathian Mountains. And then the mountain range along the Adriatic Sea, that's of course the Balkans. So places like Slovenia, Croatia, Albania, Bosnia, situated there today. The blue long strip is Lake Balaton, and that's where Jókai Mór had his villa. Images coming up soon. And then you can see that Hungary was basically situated between that horseshoe formation of the Carpathian Mountains and the mountain ranges along the Adriatic Sea. So beautiful statue of Arpad on Hero Square, and Jókai Mór tells us in chapter 15 of Golden Age in Transylvania that these newcomers to this area deposed the temples that were built by the Romans, deposed the culture that remained there from the time of the Huns, and created their own temples. So they were the Arpad and the Magyar chiefs were not Christian. They came from Asia. They had a pagan religion, and so it's beautiful how Jókai Mór describes that all of these pagan gods of the Roman Empire were deposed and replaced by the pagan gods of the Magyars who populated that area later on. Beautiful monument to the 7 chiefs. And this is the photograph that shows the Munkácsy painting in the background of Arpad and his 7 chiefs. And that is the Museum of Fine Arts and the Hungarian flag about the museum. So the exhibition dedicated to Munkácsy included his enormous monumental painting of Arpad. And then came Stephen. And so Jókai Mór in chapter 15 tells us that then came Stephen, who was the first Christian king of Hungary, and who then erected Christian monuments that replaced the Roman pagan monuments, that replaced the Magyar pagan monuments, and brought Christianity into this region. And of course, this basilica is named after, this is the Holy Shrine of St. Stephen in Budapest. Absolutely stunning, and his holy relics are located in the St. Stephen Basilica in Budapest. And then I posted links to several sections of this rock opera called István a király, István the King, which was immensely popular among the teenagers. So that was my soundtrack when I was a teenager in the 1990s, and I had spiky short hair, I had a Walkman, I had headphones, and I just walked around and listened to this opera, rock opera. It's fascinating. Recently, it was turned into an opera. So my mom and I went to see it as an opera in the Budapest Opera. It's absolutely stunning, and it's about this battle between Hungarian Christianity and paganism at the time of King Stephen. And then came Batu Khan. The Mongols arrived, and guess which way they took to get into the Pannonia plain? the Carpathian Mountains, the Veretsky Pass. And my dad was so fascinated by the fact that the Huns, the Magyars, and the Mongols all came through the same pass in the Carpathian Mountains that he actually visited the place. And of course, he was so fascinated with the Asian history of Hungary that he went all the way to Mongolia and traveled through Mongolia, stayed in a yurt, rode on Mongolian horses, and he was just endlessly into finding out the sources. So my desire to always go to the source and actually like visit the village where D'Artagnan was born in order to understand the Three Musketeers better, you know where it comes from. Look at the map of the Mongol invasion of Europe. Russia, of course, is going to be under Mongol rule for 200 years. Moscow, Vladimir, Kiev, Chernigov, all of these places will be under Mongol rule for 200 years. But look at Transylvania. They came through the Carpathian Mountains from the east, but they also went down to the bottom of the Carpathian Mountains and came from the south. So Hungary was invaded by the Mongols from 3 different directions. And my mom and I are going to go to the place where the big battle happened, the Muhi Chata, or the Muhi battle, which weakened Hungarian unity. So after the Mongolian invasion of Hungary, Hungary started weakening tremendously. And so we talked about this guy, and he is a huge part of the Golden Age in Transylvania, right? He is the man who tried to halt yet another incoming empire coming into Europe from the south. And that, of course, is the Turkish Empire. So Hunyadi János, and then Hunyadi Castle is mentioned in the Golden Age of Transylvania. He is a Transylvanian lord who tried to prevent the takeover of Belgrade by the Turks. And so it's fascinating. You know, we learned all kinds of amazing trivia. The fact that we still have churches ringing their bells at 12 noon everywhere in the world is due to this man. The Pope was so fearful of a Turkish Ottoman Muslim empire encroaching further north into Europe that he asked all the churches in Christendom to ring their bells at 12 noon to gather their parishioners to pray for this Hungarian lord. His name is Hunyadi János, so that his battle against the Turks in Belgrade would be victorious. And we still ring bells at noon because of this tradition. And so here he is battling the advancement of Ottoman Turkey into Europe. And this is the castle, the Hunyadi Castle in Transylvania, which is absolutely miraculous. And it's considered to be one of the largest castle complexes in Europe. I can't recommend enough visiting it. It's stunning. Hungarians love it so much that they made a small scale reconstruction of this castle in Budapest near Hero Square. So you can visit. And today it houses the largest agricultural museum in all of Europe. So all kinds of fun places to visit. And then, of course, this is a statue to Hunyadi János in the town of Pécs. And I visited this town with my dad. And then his son, Mátyás. So Mátyás was the last Hungarian king who unified Hungary. And Jókai Mór in the Golden Age of Transylvania mentions both of them. So it's so important to know Hungarian history in order to appreciate and love this novel, because his painstaking appreciation of how all of these historical trends, all of these historical characters come into alignment and how they shape the narrative of Hungarian history is just absolutely stunning. And then this monument received the Grand Prix at the Paris Expo in the early 20th century. And this is the monument to Mátyás and in the town of Cluj, which is today in Romania. He's so important, he is on the 1,000 forint banknote. Hungary is not on the euro. It's in the European Union. It is in NATO, but it preserved its own currency, and it's called the forint. So this is the most commonly used currency in Hungary, the 1,000. And then, of course, the Mátyás fountain at the Buda Castle. So one of my favorite places to visit when I'm in Budapest. And then came Suleiman the Magnificent. So we are learning about the Turkish history of Hungary. And really, this tutorial is about the fact that Hungary celebrates its Independence Day on March 15th. And it is the date when they begin their battle against the Austrians in 1848. That's why Jókai Mór's novel about the revolution of 1848 is so important. But you should be asking the question like, but first the Magyars came, and then the Mongols came, and then the Turks came. And yet Hungary decides that March 15th, their battle against the Austrians in 1848, is the inception of the Independence Day. And really the answer is in this complex interplay between Hungary and Ottoman Turkey that lasted for about 200 years. So Suleiman reached all the way to Buda. A little known fact, Budapest is the most northern location for Muslim Sunni pilgrimages in the world. And I've talked to several of these pilgrims that I encountered because I would go to the tomb of the last governor, Turkish governor of Buda Castle. I would go to the tomb of Gül Baba, who was a Sufi mystic who came to Budapest with Suleiman the Magnificent. And I would see all of these pilgrims from Turkey. All of these monuments are beautifully maintained in collaboration between the Hungarian government and the Turkish government. I told you about the battle of the women of Eger when the Turks came and this heroic defense. When all the men in the castle died, women picked up the sabers and were hurling rocks and defending the castle. Of course, I visited the castle a couple of years ago. I love this picture, you know, that I traveled with Watson. So this is Watson at the Eger Castle. And I showed this photo to some of my Hungarian friends, and they were like, if Watson would have been there during the Turkish invasion, Eger would not have fallen to the Turks. I mean, that is one heroic 9-pound Yorkie. And so now we come to this Croatian-Hungarian lord, Zrini Miklós, who did the 300 at Thermopylae kind of defense of the Szigetvár castle against Suleiman the Magnificent. And this painting, I posted it on the site. Some of you absolutely loved it. This is by the Hungarian painter Holosi Simon, who had a studio in the town where I was born, in that small town on the banks of the Tisza River. So anytime anyone mentions Holosi Simon, I just feel like I need to weep and be so grateful. He was a magnificent Hungarian painter. And Suleiman the Magnificent, the greatest Turkish sultan who ever lived, died on the territory of Hungary. So this is the place that marks the location where Zrini Miklós passed away. I mean, he died defending the Szigetvár castle, and Suleiman Magnificent died of natural causes. Now, of course, he's buried in the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul, but the monument where he died commemorates the struggle between these two peoples on the spot where both of them died. And there is a place where you can cleanse yourself. This is once again a place of Muslim pilgrimage in Hungary. And this is the place where you can cleanse yourself before you go to pray at the site where Suleiman Magnificent died. And this is the tomb of Gül Baba. He is the Sufi mystic who came to Budapest with Suleiman the Magnificent. And this is where his törbe, called törbe in Hungarian, the tomb of Gül Baba. And this is where I also encountered some Muslim pilgrims. And then this photo was taken by a Turkish young man who was fascinated by the fact that this woman who spoke Hungarian and had a Yorkie in her arms was so interested in talking about Suleiman the Magnificent. He came from Turkey to pray at the grave of the last Turkish governor of the Buda Castle. And please remember his name, Abdul Rahman. His image is coming up pretty soon. If you really want to experience Turkish Hungary, you have to go to this bath complex. This pool was constructed at the time when Suleiman the Magnificent was still alive. It's Rudas bath, and every time I land in Budapest, pick up my mom, we go to the cemetery to visit dad, then we have cake, and then I go to this place. So it's my favorite place to take the tiredness of travel off my weary bones. And Hungary is a mecca for thermal spas, because do you remember the Romans called it Aquincum, the city of waters? And there are dozens of thermal pools in Budapest, but this one is my absolute favorite. So then this is an image that I posted on the site when we were talking about Jan Sobieski, the Polish military leader who stopped the Turks from advancing into Vienna, and he's mentioned by Jókai Mór in the Golden Age in Transylvania. And Jókai Mór then is our leader and our guide into understanding how we go from Turkish Hungary to Austrian Hungary. And this is the film that I saw this when I was a kid. I still need to watch it. This was a super busy spring, but I can't recommend it enough. If you can find a way to stream it, it's the Hungarian adaptation of the Kőszű ember fiai of Baron's Sons. So the Austrians helped the Hungarians to get the Turks out of Hungary and out of the Buda Castle. And this painting is at the National Gallery in Budapest, and the corpse of the man that you see under the victorious Habsburgs and their spectacular horses is Abdul Rahman, the last Turkish governor of the Buda Castle. And the statue of Eugene of Savoy, who is one of the people who entered Buda Castle during the defeat of the Turks, is in front of the Buda Castle, which is today the National Gallery. This monument, so do you remember the name, the Vienna Gate, or the Bécsi Kapu at the Buda Castle? There was so much fighting happening there, both when the Austrians took the Buda Castle from the Turks, and also when the Hungarians were taking the Buda Castle from the Austrians. And this monument is right next to the Bécsi Kapu, or the Vienna Gate, where most of the most heavy fighting was happening each time the Buda Castle was taken by someone. We talked about Rákóczi, who tried to fight the Austrians, who liberated Hungary from the Turks and stayed. And this is my favorite photo I've ever taken. I don't know how it happened. It's just me and my little iPhone, but this is the spectacular statue of Rákóczi next to the Hungarian parliament. And remember, Rákóczi was the one who negotiated with Peter the Great to perhaps get Russian help to get the Austrians out of Hungary. And he negotiated with Louis XIV, who is coming up in our Dumas readings, to get help against the Austrians, because both Russians and the French were enemies of Austria. And so it's fascinating, some of the negotiations between Rákóczi and emissaries from Peter the Great and Louis XIV were happening in the Ungvar Castle, where yours truly used to run away to read Stendhal's The Red and the Black. So I was like seated in a very important place when I was reading all of my fabulous 19th century tomes as a teenager. So here's a portrait of Maria Theresa. She is the Habsburg Austrian empress who presided over Hungary during her entire long reign. Her son, Joseph, who was the patron of Mozart, who presided over Hungary during his very short reign. And then those of you who read War and Peace with me, you know this guy. He is Francis of Austria, and he is the greatest loser probably in history. So when the Napoleonic invasion happened, he was not just the emperor of Austria-Hungary, he was the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, which started with Charlemagne in 800. So 1,000 years of this loose confederation of Central European states, mostly ruled by Habsburgs towards the end of the Holy Roman Empire. And this is the structure that Napoleon disbanded after the Battle of Austerlitz, which is described in War and Peace. And so all of a sudden, Austria is weakened by Napoleon. That's a very important point. So in 1806, there is no Holy Roman Empire. The loose confederation of German states becomes even looser. Austria loses some of its power. It regains some of its power with the Congress of Vienna of 1815 after Napoleon is sent to St. Helena, but still, Hungarians start demanding their independence. One, because of the ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity that were introduced everywhere in Europe by the great French Revolution. And two, because Napoleon weakened the Austrians so much who were still ruling Hungary. You have to understand that Hungary had the same position within the Austrian Empire in the early 19th century as Ireland in the British Empire. You could not speak the language. The culture was frowned upon. you had to speak German in order to succeed in the Austrian Empire of the early 19th century. And Hungarians really wanted to have their say in the way they were governed. You have to understand, Hungary lost its freedom and independence in 1526, when the Turks first came and won the Battle of Mohacs. 500th anniversary coming up next year. And right now, Hungary is experiencing the first 35 contiguous years of independence since 1526. So that is the tragedy of Hungary, and that is sort of this fact about Hungary that we must know. So we get finally to Kossuth Lajos, who was a good buddy of Jókai Mór, and now we have to switch books. So it's Baron's Sons, and Jókai Mór will tell us a great deal about how the revolution started in Paris, how the revolution continued in Vienna, and how in Budapest the uprising started on March 15th, which to this day is Hungary's Independence Day. So this is the storming of the Buda Castle by the Hungarians to get the Austrians out. So the Austrians got the Turks out of the Buda Castle, and the Hungarians tried to get the Austrians out in May of 1849. The revolution started on the steps of the National Museum right here, where I am with Loyal Watson, where this young man, Petőfi Sándor, Hungary's national poet, recited his incredibly rousing poem called Talpra Magyar hív haza. On your feet, Hungarians, the motherland is calling. It's the national song. He recites this poem on March 15th, 1848. This is the start of the revolution, and Jókai Mór was a participant in this revolution. So in this novel, he describes why Hungarians fought so hard in 1848, how this revolution failed, and why it was important that Hungarians then had a cultural revival to counter their military and political loss in 1848, 1849. Statue of Petőfi Sándor, Petőfi Sándor Museum in central Budapest. This would have been the uniform of Hungarians when they fought in 1848. So Széchenyi was one of the liberal revolutionaries. He felt that perhaps negotiations with Austria would get Hungary better position at the negotiating table. This bridge is named after him. So that's how important he is in Hungarian culture, because he was instrumental in the construction of the bridge. And then Batthyány was the hardcore revolutionary calling for complete disintegration of the relationship between Austria and Hungary. And of course, he was shot by a firing squad. And this is his mausoleum at the Kerepesi Cemetery. So Batthyány was the first Hungarian prime minister, and he was killed by a firing squad in Budapest. And I need to add a photograph of the space of the place of the square when it happened, because it's still memorialized to this day. And there's Kossuth and the amazing voice of freedom. Kossuth Lajos was a journalist, a politician. He was arrested by the Austrians in the early 1840s, kept in jail for years. He kept writing that Hungary needs to have its independence, and the Austrians just couldn't shut him up. And the revolution did happen, and the revolution failed. So those of you who read this translation with me, you were probably so miserable because you realized the chapters that are missing are some of the best chapters. It was an abridged translation. There's no complete translation of this novel. And I'm going to, like, in my free time, when I have a moment to surface, I will start looking into the possibility of initiating a complete translation. So the translator thought that the two chapters that are dedicated to the Hungarians storming the Buda Castle are not important for the translation. And remember how I reenacted this moment in March by driving across the bridges and through Buda and Pest to all the locations mentioned in those chapters in the course of 5 hours while I was listening to the audio recording in Hungarian. It was one of the best literary events of my life. It was absolutely incredible. So I was driving on the Buda side, and you see the Buda side right now. And remember, at one point, there is a spy house on the Pest side where they light 5 lanterns in the windows, and that's how they communicate with the Austrians in the Buda Castle. And I was literally driving along the embankment of the Buda side, and I saw a house on the Pest side with 5 windows. It was eerie, completely eerie. So it was just absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing. So here are some of the images from that night of 5 hours of driving with Jókai Mór and battling the Austrians out of the Buda Castle. And this is the Buda Castle fortification that the Hungarians had to storm. And Jókai Mór writes so beautifully about the fact that it pained the Hungarians to have to shoot their way up to their own castle, to the castle that is so dear to them. And he makes all of these historical comparisons, like he was saying that Russians had to give up Moscow in order to defeat Napoleon. We had to destroy the Buda Castle in order to get the Austrians out of there. And the last chapter, remember the half-page chapter, the very, very last chapter, chapter 50 of Baron's Sons, shows this incredible reconciliation image of a young child playing with a young lamb and making a flower garland for the young lamb on the green in the Buda Castle where so much death has occurred. And for him, this is this image of resurrection of the Buda Castle. I have to admit, I was crying when I was reading that chapter. It was extremely moving. So Jókai Mór, he could not fathom why the revolution failed. It was so important for him to fight for Hungary's freedom. And so he was suicidal. He wanted to commit suicide, and it was this lovely woman who saved him, Laborfalvi Rózsa, here portrayed in the costume of Gertrude from Shakespeare's Hamlet. She was a Shakespearean actress. She was lovely. She was scandalous. She had a child out of wedlock before she married Jókai, and they got married in 1848. So you would think, like, revolutionary ideas would make such marriages okay, but her position was scandalous. But when she saved his life, and she basically told him, "You are a young man, you have a lot to live for," and her heroic effort in saving his life really earned her a great deal of respect among his friends. So in the course of my walk through the Buda Castle, I found the place where Kossuth Lajos was imprisoned in the 1830s and all the way 1837 to 1840. So you can see that he was fighting for Hungary's independence way before the revolution was unleashed. It's fascinating. Another young woman visited, was heroic in the struggle. You could only get visits from family members or wives and fiancés. A young woman who never met Kossuth Lajos showed up at the prison, said, "I'm his fiancé," and gained immediate admittance to him. And she asked him, "What do you need?" And he said, "Just anything to read." So there were huge limitations on what a prisoner, a prisoner of the Austrians could read in the Buda Castle. But King James Bible was okay, and Shakespeare was okay. So that's why, running a little bit ahead, when Kossuth Lajos started giving speeches in English in England and eventually in the United States in 1850 and 1851, he sounded like a biblical prophet because he learned English from the King James Bible. So here's a daguerreotype of Kossuth Lajos. When the revolution failed, he actually took the Hungarian crown with him and buried it in a wood in Transylvania. So those of you who read Les Miserables with me a few years ago, do you remember how Jean Valjean has to make these mysterious visits to this wood? And all of the peasants are talking about the devil showing up with a spade every once in a while. I mean, these things were actually happening. And so eventually the crown was returned to Hungary. And guess where the crown was in the late 20th century after Hungary became a part of the Soviet bloc and the Warsaw Pact? It was in Fort Knox in the United States. And it was President Carter who returned Hungarian royal crown to Hungary. Well, tremendous gratitude of Hungarian people to President Carter for returning the crown. All right, so we have some viewers here from Algona, and this is the statue to Kossuth Lajos in Algona, which is this county seat of the Kossuth County. And here's one more image of his mausoleum, absolutely stunning, huge, huge, huge. So what happened in the aftermath of the failure of the revolution is the story of Jókai Mór. So he was suicidal, he was saved by his wife, and he dedicated himself to the creation of Hungarian culture, Hungarian literature, development of the Hungarian language. Hungarian aristocrats started wearing these stunning outfits. They started wearing Hungarian national clothes instead of wearing traditional European clothes. So they would appear at the opera looking like this instead of wearing the traditional frock coat. And they just started being proud of being Hungarian. The revolution failed. They failed militarily. They failed politically to gain their independence. Culturally, they succeeded. And so this is the great revival of Hungarian culture in the late 19th century. Women started incorporating this cross braiding in their outfits. And this dress is, of course, what inspired my jacket. I'm not wearing it today because it's very hot and humid in Iowa City. But you saw the photographs. I gave all of my talks in my Hungarian jacket. So I told you about this before. Franz Liszt, who was a part of this like international set and was hanging out with people like Paganini, Rossini, he all of a sudden, right before the Revolution of 1848, during the Revolution of 1848, and right after, started writing Hungarian rhapsodies, which are some of the most famous things he's remembered for today. Of course, the Music Academy in Budapest, and this is a stunning hall, is named after him. And I told you earlier that the film Maria, where Angelina Jolie is portraying Maria Callas, was filmed on the stage of the Music Academy in Budapest. And then this is the portrait of Franz Liszt by none other than the man who is buried at Kerepesi Cemetery, Munkácsy Mihály. This is his grave. And he was a very, very sophisticated Parisian. He had a salon in Paris. He painted Parisian aristocratic and wealthy ladies. This is the painting of Munkácsy Mihály that I used for my tutorial on Paradise Lost of Milton. Here's Milton dictating Paradise Lost to his daughters. This is Munkácsy Mihály's contribution to the grand staircase of the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. So he was an international celebrity. He was one of the most demanded European portraitists of his time. And yet, what did he start painting? Hungarian peasants. So here's a butter churner. Here's The Last Morning of the Condemned Men. And of course, my mom and I went to see the biggest retrospective of Munkácsy Mihály in March at the Museum of Fine Arts. So here's his, and these are all of my photographs from March, Woman Gathering Sticks, and his most famous painting, Sleepy Apprentice, or the Yawning Apprentice. And I saw his portrait of Franz Liszt. So here is his portrait of Franz Liszt. Of course, another Hungarian composer was inspired by the failure of 1848 to create Hungarian music. And so this is Erkel, and Erkel is responsible for the composition of Hungarian national anthem, or hymnus. As a matter of fact, the scores of his national anthem are incorporated into his grave. And where is he buried? At the Kerepesi Cemetery. So the modern building of the Hungarian Opera is named after him, Erkel. And this is, of course, the Budapest Opera, which is absolutely breathtaking. I can't recommend it enough. It is probably the most beautiful opera in the world. I mean, I'm rah-rah for Hungarian culture, but it truly is stunning. Of course, his bust is in the opera building on the grand staircase. And here's my ticket of the opera that I saw in March, which is his most rah-rah patriotic Hungarian operas, Bangban, which includes the song Hazám, Hazám, which makes Hungarians weep. It's my homeland, my homeland. And I had a spectacular seat for this performance. And in front of the Opera House in Budapest, it's Ferenc Erkel statue and Franz Liszt statue, the two Hungarian composers that contributed the most to the development of Hungarian music, not just for Hungary, but making it known internationally. And this is the building, which is now the W Hotel, but this is what you see from the balcony of the Budapest Opera while you are having your wine before Act 1 and your coffee before Act 2, right? So if you ever go, that's the routine. And of course, this is the birth of ethnomusicology. So Bartók, who went to, guess where? The Transylvanian villages that Jókai Mór described in the Golden Age of Transylvania. And he recorded the songs of the folklore that was still alive. So do you remember how wonderful it is that when they're going to battle in one of the chapters in the Golden Age in Transylvania, they have a poet who composed a song about this battle, and he is reciting the poem that is now a song as they are marching into battle. So this is a place where folklore is completely alive. And so even in the early 20th century, where Bartók ended up there, he was stunned by the fact that folklore was not something that had to be resurrected, but it was a living art form. And that's why the cover of this book is so important, because these wooden gates of Transylvania, they're still there. They're still, I mean, I've seen village after village after village in Transylvania where every single household has a beautifully carved, completely unique wooden gate. And Romanian folk dances, and then yay to Bartók Béla, who wrote a beautiful symphonic poem dedicated to Kossuth, the loss in 1848. And one of the movements of the symphonic poem is a funeral march for the revolution. So can't recommend it enough. And then, of course, he's my favorite Hungarian composer, actually. It's Kodály Zoltán and his Hari János. Please listen to the entire suite. It's about a boasting Hungarian peasant, very much though, like so many boasting Hungarian peasants, which we encountered in Baron's Sons, who says that he defeated Napoleon all by himself. If you need to know the true story of how Napoleon was defeated, it's this boastful Hungarian peasant who becomes a Hungarian hussar, gets on his horse, lifts his saber, and defeats Napoleon single-handedly. A delightful romp through Hungarian music. So it's called Hari János. And I told you earlier that it has a tremendous part for a cimbalom player. And so I heard from my musical friends that when the United States orchestras would start scheduling Hari János performances, they had to work around the schedule of this one cimbalom player who could handle Kodály's incredibly complex score for the cimbalom part in Hari János. And then if I need to perk up and if I need some good, fun music to lift my spirits, is Dances of Galantov, Kodály Zoltán. Just fabulous music. And then came the porcelain. So Holoháza basically was a glass factory, and it's the oldest Hungarian porcelain manufacturer. But then they started picking up folk motifs. So look at their first earthenware and then porcelain. And I have the Holoháza porcelain Hungarian peasant girl and peasant boy. And this is sort of their one of their most iconic still manufactured porcelain items. Then Zsolnai created, once again, wonderful porcelain that incorporated Hungarian folk motifs. And my dad and I visited their factory. It is a tremendous, tremendous tour. The fountain, actually, this fountain is so famous, it was reconstructed in Budapest. And then they created this glaze called iosine, named after the Greek goddess of the dawn, Ios. And it's this iridescent glaze that received Grand Prix and first prizes and all kinds of prizes at all of the World Expos when it was first created. It is just absolutely the most beautiful, beautiful item. Lots of items manufactured. All of my kids got birthday presents this year of various shapes of porcelain with the iosine glaze from my mom. So very, very famous. And then came Herend. So Herend, the factory is still there. You can visit the place. And just look, they started manufacturing porcelain that incorporated peasant motifs like hussars and dancing peasants and guys who are in the pushta with the horses. And so this is my mom's present for me. This is the Hungarian hussar, which is a reconstruction of the hussar. The statue is in the Buda Castle. And then what happened was remarkable. Hungarian aristocrats, instead of purchasing Sèvres porcelain from France, or Meissen porcelain from Germany, started ordering Hungarian porcelain. And so this is the Apony pattern for the Hungarian noble family of Apony. And I actually watched one of the artists who works at Herent creating this pattern. And it's incredible because all of this porcelain is still manufactured by hand to this day. This is the Guadalupe pattern, and the Empress of Austria, Elizabeth, known as Sisi, for her Hungarian palace at Guadalupe, ordered a set of Hungarian porcelain, which is to this day known as the Guadalupe pattern, and then came the Victoria pattern. So when Herent exhibited their stuff at the World Expo in London, this is the Crystal Palace Expo, Queen Victoria was so enamored of this pattern that she ordered an entire set for the Buckingham Palace. To this day, it is known as the Victoria pattern, and of course, it's still manufactured. When the Rothschilds found out that Queen Victoria is ordering Hungarian porcelain, they needed Hungarian porcelain too. And this became known as the Rothschild bird pattern, and it is still manufactured today. And of course, the Victoria pattern goes along with Victoria's love for Hungarian culture, right? She loved Hungarian porcelain to the point where she ordered it for Buckingham Palace, and her favorite non-English writer was Jókai Mór. There he is, and there's his tomb once again. This is the statue at his birthplace, and he's a child of the Danube. The city where he was born is divided into two parts. One part is in Hungary, the other part is in Slovakia. And so the part where he was born is on the Slovakia side of the Danube today. So the Hungarian part is called Komárom. The Slovakian part is called Komárno, and his birthplace is there. And the wonderful villa that I visited with my mom on Lake Balaton and Balatonfüred, and it is a shrine to all things Jókai Mór. There's his desk, and notice that even his velvet writing jacket has the Hungarian cross braiding. And it's the most dog-friendly museum I've ever been to. I love to show this image. This is Watson before the tour and Watson after the tour. And remember I mentioned that Jókai Mór loved his Newfoundland dogs, and he incorporated his Newfoundland dogs into Baron's Sons. At the end of the novel, one of the characters has children, and those children are playing with a Newfoundland dog. And I noted in my commentary, Jókai Mór is just paying homage to his own dogs. This is the 60-volume Jókai Mór set that my mom gave me for Anna Day last year. Here's my eternally youthful mother. She never ages. I don't know how the woman does it, but and there we are celebrating Anna Day with my favorite cake. And so this is the story. This is how it all began, was this article in January, 100 Days of Jókai Mór. Do you remember how much fun we had making his favorite bean soup? It's fascinating. When I was doing the talk in New York City, I didn't include this photo into my PowerPoints. That's silly of me. And one of the attendees raised his hand and he said, "Do you know about Jókai bean soup?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? We cooked Jókai bean soup like on several continents. I mean, there were people in like Tbilisi, Georgia, cooking Jókai bean soup." And he said, "But did you do it the right way? You need pork shanks." And I'm like, "I'm from Iowa. We have pork shanks. Of course we had pork shanks." So it's fascinating. This person in New York City felt like you can't do it without pork shanks. And I'm like, this is the pork shank paradise of the world. We are from Iowa. We have pork shanks. And, Budapest, all of these amazing places. And of course, when Kossuth Lajos felt that the revolution failed, he went to England. Victoria didn't like him. He was too revolutionary. He went to the United States. And between 1850 and 1851, he gave so many speeches in the United States defending freedom that 1/3 of the population of the United States heard him speak in person. He even visited Springfield, Illinois, and met this unknown lawyer named Abraham Lincoln and had a lovely conversation with him. So the two defenders of freedom, how I wish I would have been a fly on the wall, hearing the conversation between Jókai Mór speaking his biblical prophecy English and Abraham Lincoln. And of course, when Jókai felt that Hungarians cannot gain their independence from Austria, he joined another country that was fighting Austrian domination, and that was, of course, Italy. There's no united Italy from the moment when the Huns dislodge all of these European peoples and the European and Roman Empire collapses. Italy will be disjointed for centuries. And so Kossuth Lajos joins Garibaldi and his fight for Italian freedom from Austrians in northern Italy and Italian unification. And of course, it happened in 1870. So my joke is the Huns broke Italian unity when they invaded Europe and dislodged all the peoples, and Italy stopped being unified. And it took one very important Hungarian, Kossuth Lajos, to regain Italian unity. So Hungarians, the Huns broke it, Kossuth Lajos put it all together. And that's why there's a statue to Garibaldi in front of the National Museum in Budapest. So Garibaldi was the comrade of, or Jókai Mór was the comrade of Garibaldi when Garibaldi was fighting for Italian independence from Austria and Italian unification. And Jókai Mór was the one who delivered the funeral oration at the funeral of Kossuth Lajos. So Jókai, there's another fabulous statue to Kossuth right by the Parliament building in Budapest, and of course in Algona in Italy, in Algona in Iowa. And then here's Watson to prove that he was in Kossuth County or Kossuth County. Do you realize how many things dedicated to Kossuth there are in Iowa? I went through Kossuth Avenue right here just east of Sioux City during my drives through Iowa. And this is what Iowa looks like. Those of you who need to see visuals of Iowa, this is Iowa. This is why we love it so much. And then my mom and I chanced upon Kossuth Township, was a beautiful Kossuth cemetery way in the east of the state, almost on the Mississippi River. So there's Kossuth in Kossuth County, there's Kossuth next to the Missouri River, and there's Kossuth next to the Mississippi River. We just love Kossuth so much here in Iowa. And this is also what Iowa looks like. Absolutely amazing. So this is me at the Kossuth Monument in New York City during the celebrations of Hungary's Independence Day in March of this year. And I love the statue because remember I told you that these two look like Richard Baradlai from Bear and Sons and Boksa Gergő, the cow whisperer. Remember the ones who, I mean, he's just like an amazing peasant hero of this novel. Jókai Mór knows how to write spectacular aristocratic ladies like Baroness Baradlai and spectacular peasant heroes. And there it is. Guess what? There is a bust to Kossuth Lajos in the US Capitol. There it is. And Kossuth Lajos was the second international celebrity who gave a speech in the American Congress. The first one, of course, was Marquis de Lafayette. So Marquis de Lafayette addressed the American Congress as a first international dignitary. Kossuth Lajos was the second. Few more images. Love Budapest. Come visit. This film was released a year ago, 2 years ago. The title of the film comes from that poem of Petőfi Sándor, Most vagy soha, talpra magyar, híva haza, and Now or Never. So the main image is of Petőfi Sándor, this young man who recited the poem on March 15th. And do you see Jókai Mór right behind him? So he is right above his right shoulder. So Jókai Mór is a part of this film. I read controversial reviews. I read great reviews. Still haven't seen the movie, so I have a lot of film watching to do, Hungarian film watching to do still this summer. It's fascinating. When my daughter and I were in Budapest, we walked through the street, which is where all of the universities are. I love to walk through there. It makes me feel like I'm in Iowa City. And it was transformed into this like 19th century market. Guess what it was? It was the film set for the film. So they were filming this movie as my daughter and I were walking through this part of Budapest. So fun to be on a film set. Two more things. This is Franz Joseph, the Austrian emperor that was put on the throne in December of 1848. His father was not dealing very well with Hungary demanding its independence, and Austria could not survive if Hungary would leave the Union, because Hungary was so important economically. So I showed you the beautiful porcelain of Zsolnai. Zsolnai factory was the largest manufacturer in the Austro-Hungarian monarchy before World War I, because they were manufacturing tiles and pipes, and everybody needed tiles and pipes. So Hungary was not the weak unit of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. It was the economically powerful unit without which Austria could not survive. And so this young man was placed into the position of his father, and he asked the Russian Emperor Nicholas I to come in and help him crush the Hungarian Revolution in 1849. So this is the Russian Emperor Nicholas I, who is mentioned. Remember, in the last chapters of Baron's Sons, they're Russians, and all of the Hungarians who went over to the Austrian side are saying that they are willing to even sing the praises of the Russian Tsar, even sing the Russian imperial anthem, as long as Hungarian revolution is suppressed, and they don't care who does it, the Austrians or the Russians. The Hungarian Compromise, of course, happened in 1867, and that's when Hungary is allowed to have its own parliament. So Hungary just sort of wins diplomatically where it could not win militarily, about 20 years after the failure of the revolution. And this is Franz Joseph in his declining years, wearing a Hungarian jacket. A few more images. So I think I'm going to just stop right there, because that one, maybe I'll find a good place to stop right here. So I'm going to stop share and take questions. Sorry it took so long. We had kind of a slow start because I was trying to maneuver too many things. But thank you so much for giving me your ear, and any questions. This could be an endless discussion. I mean, you know me, we could be here for 5-6 more hours and still talking about Hungarian literature and Hungarian culture. So and it's fascinating, when I was giving the talk at the Kossuth Foundation in DC, the president who introduced me, he said, I read this article about Kossuth County in Iowa, and that was thrilling. And then I looked up Anna Barker on the internet, and I looked at the names of all of these people she assembled to read Jókai Mór with her, and none of them were Hungarian. And I was completely mystified. Why a woman whose name is Anna Barker, the most neutrally American name imaginable, is leading hundreds of people around the world in the reading of a Hungarian writer. And so he said, I needed to meet this woman. And so I actually visited them in February when I was visiting our son in DC. And that's how this talk was put together. So shall we read more Hungarian literature sometime in the future? And you know me, our life is all set through 2028, because we came up with that 5-year plan because we did not want to be bored, and we did not want the global events to overshadow our intellectual life in any way, shape, or form. So those of you who are new to what we are doing, so this is 20 years after. This is the first sequel to The Three Musketeers, and it is a sizable tome. So it's over 800 pages. How clever is Alexander Dumas? 90 chapters for 100 days of Alexander Dumas. So that's perfect. So we're going to read this in the summer of 25. Then, of course, second sequel next summer. So we'll spend 3 summers with Three Musketeers. We need this. It's total balm for our sore souls. And then The Idiot of Dostoevsky in the fall. That will be a tough novel to read. So I'm just warning you, it gives no answers, but it is the most soulful of all of the Dostoevsky novels. And so a few surprises still coming up. Let's just say there'll be a lot of revolution in the spring of 2026. A lot of revolution coming up. So Napoleon galloping through the Alps, Jókai Mór fighting in 1848, all of that talk about Victor Hugo and Les Miserables and the Revolution of 1830 and 1832. There'll be a lot of revolution in the air. I'm dedicating all of 2026 to revolutions. So I will make an announcement probably later this summer or in the fall. And then we'll continue with Dostoevsky. We're reading, after the Idiot, we're reading Demons. We're reading The Adolescent and Brothers Karamazov one more time. Those of you who read Brothers Karamazov before, you will be amazed to what extent your understanding of this masterpiece will be enhanced now that you would have gone through all of the great novels that preceded. And then Tolstoy in 2028. He'll be 200. So, my little Hungarian jacket, it will double up very nicely for a Hungarian or a Russian hussar jacket. And in Russian, that kind of coat is called vengerka, the Hungarian coat. So in the original Russian, in War and Peace, they refer to hussar coats as vengerka, which is the Hungarian coat. So any questions? I am looking at the chat. Thank you. Thank you. So this is a question was asked. Am I teaching this at the university? And I was asked that question in New York City, and they were bewildered. They just said, "What are you going to do with all this knowledge?" Because so much about Hungarian history and Hungarian culture, and I'm just like, "No, I just did this for fun." Dad would be super proud, and it's fascinating. My father-in-law started introducing me to Iowa, so I dedicated my talks to both my father-in-law, who passed away in 2019, and my father, who passed away in 2021. They were both big history buffs. They had tremendous amount of respect for each other. They were good buddies, and so it was nice to do it for them. But maybe 2029. So stay put, don't relax. After Tolstoy, there is still literature, and so 2028 we'll spend the whole year with Tolstoy, but 2029 perhaps that Transylvanian trilogy by Miklos Bánffy. I'm endlessly fascinated by it. I have it somewhere here. Viewers are always amused because I always look on the floor for books somewhere here. So it's thick 3 tomes. And I told everyone that Americans love to read anything that has the word Transylvania in the title because it's just so recognizable, distant, unknown, exotic, strange, mysterious. So 2028, perhaps let's go back to Hungary and do the Bánffy trilogy because it's available in stunning complete translation, which was supervised by his daughter, who just passed away this year. So Bánffy is our anti-hero in Golden Age in Transylvania. I love that novel so much. That translation was so good. The historical notes in the back were fabulous. The intro was spectacular. And everybody was just wondering, like, who is the hero of this novel? It's just so episodic. We move in and out, we zoom in and out. We have this wonderful scholar named Kellerman, who doesn't have any boots and whose snack is eaten by mice, and who his study looks like my study, right? Do you remember, like, Scholar Kellerman? He has to walk through his study the way you walk through puddles, just kind of calculating where you're going to stop. That's my study. So, and then we finally realize in the last chapter that the main character of the Golden Age of Transylvania is the anti-hero, the man who collapsed Transylvanian unity, this dark, brooding hero who made so many wrong choices in life, and at the end was redeemed by love. So it's fascinating. We read 2 novels. One of them ends with death by firing squad. The other one ends with death by beheading. And I'm just going to end on this cheerful note because no spoilers, but in this book, there will be plenty of that kind of violence coming up. So if there are no questions, we'll do a Zoom in August at the end of this to cover all this, and I'm going to enjoy our journey through. So we are moving from 17th century Transylvania to 17th century France and England. So we're staying in the same century, one of the most destructive centuries in European history. having too much fun all along, all the way. Thank you. Maureen, did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to thank you again. It's just been so much fun. Never knew it could be this much fun, but I think that's the your way is you have this just absolute incredible ability with your kind of the density of your language and the way you explain things, and I don't know, it's just been wonderful. So